Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to our end of Cyrano recap. We've finished the story. Well done. You made it all on your own. I'm super proud of you. And I hope you enjoyed it. So let's talk about Act 5. So remember, we are 15 years into the future, essentially. So Christian died. That's the last that we learn of that time. And then we're 15 years jumped ahead now. So, les questions. Page 96. Who is the widow that Sister Claire mentions? So, if you guessed that in our survey that Roxanne ends up in a convent, you were correct. She does not become a nun because she's married. She's a widow. So she doesn't become a nun, but she does just decide to live in a convent. She doesn't get remarried. She doesn't ever fall in love with anybody else. She stays very true to Christian for the rest of these 15 years. And she just lives in the convent because she wants to be away from society. She wants to be somewhere peaceful. So if you think of her character development throughout the story of being this very high society person, frequenting salons, going to the theater, always very social, and then after Christian's death, it really changed her to being reclusive, not seeing very many people, and wanting to be pretty much in constant mourning. So she really changes throughout this story and because of Christian's death. Who is the Duc de Gramont? So the Duc de Gramont was formerly known as Comte de Guiche, so he has become a duke, and just within the last couple months of this scene, actually, or this act. 97, 97. Do the nuns like Cyrano? So they do like him. They say he's funny, he's well-spoken, but they also talk about how he's not a good Christian, or not a Christian at all. But they still like him as a person because he visits Roxanne every week. And he has for the last 15 years. So he has also stayed loyal to her as her friend. Has Cyrano been successful in life? No. So at this point, he's poor. He's not doing well, and he also will not accept any help from anybody. He's kind of made a lot of enemies, and now he's paying for it. Why does de Guiche feel responsible for the death of Christian? So de Guiche also visits Roxanne frequently at the convent, and he tells her that he feels responsible for Christian's death because he is the one that sent their regiment to war. And remember, he pretty much did it out of anger and spite because Roxanne and Christian got married. So that decision that he made in that space of anger, he feels like was the cause of Christian's death. Why? Does de Guiche pity Cyrano? So de Guiche and Libret meet each other, and de Guiche asks Libret how Cyrano's doing. Libret says not very well. He's very poor, and he refuses help from anybody. And de Guiche says that he doesn't pity him and not to feel too bad for him because Cyrano lived his life very freely without listening to authority or rules or religion, and he made a lot of enemies, and now he's paying for his choices. So de Guiche doesn't really feel that badly for him. However, in the next question, he does warn Libret of a rumor that he heard about Cyrano, which is that he overheard some people talking about how Cyrano is going to be the victim of an accident. Obviously not actually an accident if it's pre-planned, but he warns Libret that he heard that. Why did Ragueneau lose his pastry shop? So Ragueneau lost his pastry shop because he's too generous. So if you remember at the beginning, he told those boys if they bring his poetry back, he'll give them more pastries. So he was very generous with his product and didn't really make a lot of money because he wasn't always charging people. So he actually loses his pastry shop. Was Cyrano's injury caused by an accident? So as Cyrano was leaving his home, a large piece of wood falls on his head. We can assume since De Guiche or Duc de Gramont knew that this was going to happen to him, had heard it, it was not an accident. So someone planned this attack on Cyrano but made it look like an accident. What do you think the word mourant means? So this on page 102, and it describes Cyrano, and it means dying or someone who is fatally ill or fatally injured. How does Cyrano risk his life? He risks his life by walking all the way to see Roxanne at the convent while he has a severe head injury. So they say you should be resting, you're injured, and he doesn't care. He wanted to walk and see her for his Saturday weekly meeting. Cyrano gives his sisters permission to do what? So they're always asking him, can we pray for you? Can we pray for you? And he says no, because remember, Cyrano is very critical of religion and always has been in his writing and his plays. But in this day, he says, I'll permit you to pray for me today because he's dying. And he knows he's dying. What is Cyrano hiding from Roxanne? He hides his injury from her under his hat, so she can't see that his head is injured and bleeding. Why does Roxanne call Cyrano mon gazette? So gazette is a word that we know like as newspapers or, people who put out the news. And she calls him that because he comes to see her every Saturday and he tells her the news of the week. So he tells her some weird stories about high-class people doing silly things and stuff like that. So he tells her the news of the week every time that he visits her. Roxanne says, this is not the first time I've heard these words spoken while Cyrano reads the letter. When was the first time she heard this? So they start talking about Christian, and she talks about how she still has his last letter that he wrote. She keeps it with her always, and Cyrano says, can I read it? Can I see it? And he begins to read it, and he's reading it in the dark. So, and he has it memorized because he can't actually see it. It's nighttime. And so she realizes that he's reading it by heart. And she says, this is not the first time I've heard this. The first time was at the balcony. So remember when Christian was repeating Cyrano's words, but he wasn't doing a very good job of it, so Cyrano takes over for Christian and starts just talking himself to Roxanne, but she can't see him because it was dark. That was when she first heard those kind of words read in that voice. And then she notices, how does she discover that he's the one who wrote the letter? She realizes that he's reading it by heart. And then she starts saying, it was really you the whole time, you were in love with me, and at first he's denying it. And then finally he says, yes, I did love you, and I love you. So he says, je t'aimais et je t'aime. So I loved you and I love you. And what's the last weekly news? So before this, she also is going on to say, asking him, why didn't you ever tell me that it was you that was in love with me? And he says, look at you and look at me. Like, I would have never been good enough for you. And she says, but you're so eloquent. You're such a beautiful writer. And she starts being sad because she realized that she caused him a lot of pain, or that not she did, but the fact that he loved her and he didn't think that she would love him back caused him a lot of pain. And he tells her that she was the only woman that he ever got friendship or love from, even if it wasn't the love that he wanted from her or that he felt for her. So that he was really grateful to her for that, for being his friend and the only woman that ever showed him kindness. And then what's the last weekly news that he tells Roxanne is that he is badly injured and that he's dying. And then who is Cyrano fighting against while he's dying? So it's Lebray, Ragueneau, and Roxanne that are with him as he's dying. And he starts grabbing his sword and swinging it and saying all of these things at the end. and it's to soi, sottise, vanité, mensonge, hypocrisy, so lies, vanity, hypocrisy, judgment. He's fighting against all of these ideas that were his real enemies throughout his life, and that caused him the most pain in his life and deprived him of being able to express his love for Roxanne. So, and I think there's a part, yes, there's a part 2 where Roxanne realizes that Cyrano is dying here and says je vous aime, so that she tells him that she loves him as well, because she's always just been in love with the person that wrote those letters for her. So he does die with her love, but then he dies, and she mourns him all over, is mourning her love all over again, so is losing, and she mentions this as well, losing 2 loves. Christian, which she thought was her first and only true love, and then Cyrano, realizing that it was Cyrano's words that she loved, and then loses him as well. So it's not the happiest ending, and Cyrano dies at the end, and then the curtain closes, so that's the end of the story. But it's very good, and I think some of it's unexpected. I think people don't always expect Cyrano to be actually having good intentions with helping Christian and Roxanne, but really he just wanted Roxanne to be happy and with the person that he thought she deserved to be with, which was someone who was good on the outside, and not someone who really loved her on the inside. So yeah, it's a very interesting and complex story with a lot of complex characters, which is really impressive for the time that it was wrote. There's a lot of good literature that came out of that time, though. So like I said last week, and on Power School this week, that the French video, unfortunately, I cannot find a way to get it to you. It's not streaming anywhere. I only have it on the DVD. So maybe next year in French Club we could watch that so that you guys can see it, because the French version is great. It's also a little bit newer, but I do recommend, and I posted the English version that's from the 1950s, and I watched a little bit of it, and it's still really good. It's very well acted, but this is a play, so it's meant to be watched in action, and so I really highly recommend that you watch the movie, and it will also solidify anything that maybe you didn't understand in the book, hearing it and watching it play out. And then that'll be kind of a way for you to study for the test as well. And then remember, you have either the Jeopardy or a guide that goes to the movie that you should turn in as your study guide, but you do not need to do them both. You just need to do one or the other, so I know you studied some way. And then you have your test for this weekend and Friday. So please let me know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed this story. And next week, we'll be back with our last week of instruction. So until then, à la prochaine. Au revoir.